Part 2. Encounter. Chapter 9. At the Alchemist's. Indecisive about marching alone into the misty day, I leaned on the railing outside my door at the Dera's guest house. Mesmerized by a mongoose flitting back and forth, in and out of the drain pipes, I stared into a brick courtyard below, while a kaleidoscope of images whirled inside my head. When our plane had landed in Bombay, I found the sluggish, sticky climate oppressive after Nairobi's 5,000 feet above sea level briskness. I had been told about the climate, but I was not prepared for the shock of sights like white-clad beggars lolling in the empty stalls of the city's marketplace, giant sewer pipes housing countless poor, the endless apartments, and the squalid red-light district where little girls no older than 12, with painted faces and dirty, garish costumes, rushed to their doorways to jeer at passing vehicles, to beckon suggestively, to titter amongst themselves. Everywhere there were motorbikes, push-carts, oxen and their dung, cattle and their dung, bicycles, taxis, maimed humans scrounging for alms, filthy waifs, ragged mongrels, shoppers and cars in that teeming, steamy urban quarter, Bombay. Our next stop in Delhi, far to the north, was cooler as Sue had predicted, but the scene of chaos was the same. We had 2 hours to spare there before we had to board the train to Beas, the sleepy village just down the road from the Dera. While Bill waited outside, I visited the airline's office to arrange my flight back to California. When I emerged, I found him beside a decrepit taxi with a young, altogether sly-looking driver. "This fellow says he can take us to the silk shop and then straight back to the hotel," he announced sheepishly. "For how much?" I insisted, although I knew that he was anxious to locate a particular silk for his wife. 20 rupees, Ma'am Sahib," the entrepreneur injected swiftly. "Come on," Bill urged, pushing me into the vehicle. When the driver had installed himself behind the wheel, he turned to us. "There's full moon tonight at Taj Mahal," he leered. "Not very far away." "Bill," I whispered, clutching his sleeve, "I think we ought to get out." "Everything will be fine," he reassured me as the rattletrap lurched into Delhi's turbulent traffic, a more flagrant test of survival of the fittest than anything I had witnessed in Africa's bush. Soon we had careened onto a wide, quiet, tree-lined boulevard, and the driver had slowed to a crawl. Like an imperial potentate, he slid back in his seat, drawling, "I go to United States next year. I have cousin in Detroit. You know Detroit, yes?" "No," I shot back at him, digging my fists deeper into the threadbare upholstery. "Can't we go a little faster, please? We must be back at the hotel in 1 hour." Ignoring me completely, he continued slowly. "You go now to Taj Mahal. I give you very good price." "The silk shop," Bill suddenly commanded, as sparks spurted across the dashboard from one of many exposed wires. Finally, in Old Delhi, we pulled into an alley, dodging yoked oxen and their lethargic guides, and parked opposite a ramshackle emporium. The electricity had gone out in the building, and the old-fashioned, cage-like elevator refused to move. We were led up 4 flights of sagging, rickety stairs to the shop, where we bumped comically into each other and into the merchant's clutter as we fumbled in the dark, incense-laden atmosphere. To check colors and patterns, we were forced to haul every bolt of fabric onto a balcony. When we had made our purchases and climbed back into the waiting taxi, the car would not start. While Bill and I sat rigid and helpless in the back seat, the driver grumbled incessantly from under the hood. Very soon, I noticed Bill's fingers drumming nervously on his package. At that moment, the car belched, and we lunged again into the main stream. "Now, to Taj Mahal," the driver practically drooled. "We have exactly 10 minutes to get back to the hotel," Bill interrupted, gritting his teeth. "And if we're not there, you won't even see 20 rupees. We would like to go to the Taj Mahal, But since it is several hundred miles from here and in 20 minutes we must, I repeat, must be at the train station, we will visit it on our return to Delhi. Not now. Our driver's back shot straight up. With no further breakdowns from a suddenly cooperative vehicle, we reached the hotel where we were meeting another group of 5 South Africans bound for the Dera. We arrived without a second to spare. Grateful to join the 5, Con, Erna, Dulcie, Isabel, and Dexter, as Dulcie called Mrs. Dexter, who had just decided to go on without us, we were relieved, too, to see a more reliable mode of transport that sped us to the train station, where the crush of humanity was worse than what we had encountered in Delhi's streets. Wall to wall, people carpeted the cavernous terminal. On the crowded platform, bellowing porters, clad in dhotis, the short, pantaloon-like loincloths of India, toted 2, sometimes 3 suitcases, or even a trunk, on their heads. Under their dark, thin frames, their muscles heaved convulsively, propelling them through the throngs. The possibility of us never being reconnected with our luggage flashed through my mind, but as I thought of the care so lovingly extended to us by the Master's followers from the moment of our arrival in Bombay, even at the most inconvenient hours of the day and night, I knew that, somehow, all would be well. "Jai, Jai," tea vendors hollered, making my ears snap to attention, for it was the same as the Swahili word that Joy had often yelled from her bed as she ordered her early morning tea. Finally, the flying mail train puffed in, and we hurled ourselves through the crush of bodies into its air-conditioned coach, all maroon leather upholstery and dusty, dark brown wood, reminiscent of films of the Orient Express. Not long after we boarded it, the train slipped gracefully into the rolling countryside of northern India. Pointing out the window, Bill uttered one word that sent goosebumps up and down my spine. "Elephant." Instantly, I was back in George's Land Rover, as he, Joy, and I inched through the dense bush in a remote part of Meru Park, following an almost non-existent track. All of a sudden, twigs were snapping and branches were cracking, and a cacophony of noise had replaced the bush's overwhelming stillness. We had crept straight into an elephant herd, a herd with young to protect, and we could only cringe inside our flimsy shell of protection as the great beasts rampaged about us. All we could see were parts of elephants, trunks behind, legs racing across in front, feet kicking up dirt near the sides of the Land Rover, and we could hear only the screaming, the nerve-shattering, ear-piercing screaming of their trumpet blasts. Elephants. I tingled grimly at the memory as I watched the pachyderm, whose smaller ears, thickly set head, and chunkier body distinguished her from her larger and as yet untamable African relatives, lumbering across a marshy field with her mahout, or trainer, by her side. For the next 8 hours, we gazed at a strikingly biblical landscape, in which graceful women with flowing saris balanced earthen water jugs on their heads, while they glided ethereally along the mud pathways of villages clustered on reeded river banks. Finally, we heard our palm-reading porter shout, "Beas! Beas!" "Well, where's Dexter?" Dulcie demanded crisply when we had alighted. Like the lone survivor of a wagon train attack, she stood in a circle of suitcases on the train platform. Instinctively, our attention was drawn to the passenger cars, ghost-like in the moonlight, gliding furtively away. There, in the doorway we had just exited, being held back by the conductor, was Mrs. Dexter. "But she was right there in the corridor with us," Con stammered. "How did we lose her?" "At least 3 times in the past 8 hours," Dulcie declared. "She insisted that we had to stop in Amritsar before we got to Beas. So, Dexter is going to Amritsar." The taciturn Indian who had come to pick us up offered matter-of-factly when we had gathered in the tiny station. "At midnight, the train will return. Your friend will be all right." Then he gestured toward our waiting transportation. "Your luggage is in the bus. Come, they're waiting for you." Blacker than any African night, Pitch darkness enveloped us as we rode in his small van. The wheels spun round and round, as impartially as had the wheels of George's pickup, as Johnny squired me away from Meru. In the headlights' glare, I discerned the outlines of tall poplars standing sentinel, like the cypresses of the Holy Land. Soon, on the right, there was only a long brick wall. Not a sound issued from anyone until Bill's sudden, half-realized whisper, "The Dera," had tensed us all. Bill had explained to me that the word meant tent or resting place in Punjabi, and the colony was so called because it had grown up on the site where, in 1891, Saint Baba Jamal Singh had built a crude mud hut on the banks of the Beas River, not far from the point where Alexander the Great's troops had mutinied. For eons the land had gone unclaimed because it was considered unusable, unworkable, unproductive, even haunted. Within a few years, though, under the guidance of Baba Jamal Singh's successor, Maharaj Charan Singh, known as the Great Master, it had been converted into a thriving, self-sustaining spiritual community, a home away from home to all satsangis. Although I didn't share my companion's feelings and expectations, I nevertheless sensed that ahead lay something unlike anything I had ever known. Again I glanced at the imposing wall, and an icy feeling of uncertainty raced up my spine. A gate was swinging open. We had slowed, the tires slapping leisurely along the brick pavement that ran past a row of somnolent cottages. We rounded a main circle, then veered down a lane to yet another gate that led us into a sweeping driveway. When the bus halted, we stepped under the portico of an attractive brick building, its angularity typically Indian. "My name is Dev Prakash," announced the gentleman who greeted us. "I am in charge of the Western Guest House. I am at your service. Ladies?" He motioned to Dulcie, Isabel, and me. "Come, please." While Dave checked the bathroom's hot water geyser, I scanned my spacious and spotless room. A bed, with shelves behind and a nightstand, sat parallel to a large window that opened onto a patio. An easy chair stood facing the bed, and a mirrored vanity and bench sat against the wall perpendicular to it. Opposite, there was a built-in desk with shelves above and a closet to one side, altogether the most luxurious accommodations I had had since I'd left California. As I looked at the comfortable room that was to be mine alone, I became convinced that I was occupying space that was really meant to go to someone who was arriving later. None of the satsangis who assisted us on our trip through India had known that I was going to be a member of the South African Party. Perhaps the Dera didn't know either. Finally, my fears exploded. "Mr. Prakash," I began frantically, "did anyone inform you that I was coming? I wrote to the representative in South Africa about my plans, and he was to tell you, but neither in Bombay nor in Delhi did the satsangis who met us have my name on their lists. When I realized that, I thought, oh my God, they don't know at the Dera that I'm coming." "That's all right," he soothed. "At least you're here. As soon as you're ready, come down and have something to eat." Then, the man with the limpid, sparkling eyes had withdrawn, taking with him every one of my fears. After we had been through the buffet line in the dining hall, which Dave had opened especially for our group since the regular dinner hour was over, Khan asked, "When will Master be back, Dave?" "In 1 week, on the 15th of October. In the meantime, the schedule remains very much the same, with breakfast at 7:30. Then he remarked jovially, "The meditation siren rings at 3 a.m. I wonder how many of you will hear it." True to my Mem Sab Lala reputation, I slept as soundly that night as I ever had in camp, my ears picking up only muffled whispers heralding Mrs. Dexter's wee hour of the morning arrival from Amritsar. Still clutching uncertainly at the railing outside my room, which was on the second floor of an annex that appeared to have 12 rooms, I gazed absently across a courtyard at an identical annex as a figure clad in pajama-like Indian garments noiselessly exited her room. "That was the breakfast bell," she called lightly over the gap. Piercing the pregnant stillness, her words finally shoved me toward the stairs. When my feet touched the rubber matting, running the length of a long hall to one side of the principal structure, I heard other doors opening. They, too, then shut in hushed tones, while their occupants' flowing garments swished and crackled, creating the sole sound to disturb the Dera's profound serenity. Though some 20 other Western guests dotted the dining room, eating a breakfast of oatmeal, toast with white buffalo butter, bananas, and coffee, I sought out my new South African friends. Afterwards, as we were walking to the daily meeting, called Satsang, I confided to Dulcie. "I half expected cells and slabs of wood for beds, perhaps caves." Bright sunlight, taking the edge off my timidity, whitewashed the khaki-brown earth that stretched as far as our eyes could encompass. On our right, neat rows of red brick bungalows, with conspicuously well-arranged shade trees, punctuated the flat terrain of the monotonous plain on which the Dera was situated. To the east rose the high Himalayas. "The sadhus lived in caves," Dulcie commented as we turned left onto a wide, brick-paved boulevard. "They're advanced souls who have gone into the higher regions of consciousness, beyond mind and matter. They want only to meditate. A few years ago, when the sadhu ashram was built, masters sealed their caves. There are no hermits in Santmat. We must be in the world, but not of the world. We must do what we have to do. That includes care of the body, as well as the mind and soul. The object of this life is to dispatch both the good and the bad debts that have brought us here. Otherwise, we'll keep coming back again and again, reincarnating." My mind wandered to something written by the Master that I had read at the Hawthorns. "For each of us, albeit in so many different ways, life is a pursuit of happiness. Led by the mind, which evaluates one's impressions and formulates corresponding desires, we have launched out upon many and diverse courses of action. The ascetic follows the solitary path to his hermitage, while the man of the world continually indulges in the different sense pleasures. Every such action has its inevitable reaction. We reap what we sow, and this is the law of our life, nay, of the entire universe. New desires are created, new actions undertaken to satisfy them, new links are added to the karmic chain, and we are bound ever more and more strongly to this world. It is as the Bible says, 'Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap.'" "By those debts, Dulcie," I half questioned, thinking of how Tony had invoked the law of cause and effect to explain his vegetarianism. "Do you mean karma?" "That's right." I was thinking of the Adamsons, but more especially of the animals. Why, I mused, are we, and not animals, concerned about karma? They live by instinct. We live by our minds. Our minds create desires. Those desires lead to karma. "It sounds silly," I finally voiced my thoughts. "But are we supposed to desire only God?" "Desire, yes," Dulcie counseled. "But more than desire. We must become the one. The mind is strong, though. It does everything to divert us." We had entered a grand circle from which lanes and alleys radiated like wagon wheel spokes. Barefooted tots, chasing each other or mongrel dogs, raced amongst their elders, while from a nearby walled yard their older brothers and sisters' sing-song recitations of school lessons counterpointed the morning's ambience. Men in loose-legged, white cotton trousers with long, loose kurtas, or shirts, exchanged Radha Swamis, the traditional greeting between satsangis that is a salute to the divinity, or the soul, within. Smiling women in soft, light-hued saris and in the traditional Punjabi pants and long tunic tops, with veils draped around their shoulders and over their heads, crisscrossed past us en route to an enormous brick building on the circle's far side. "That's the satsang ghar," Dulcie said, nodding toward the massive structure set on a base of sweeping stairs. At either end of the crossbar of its T design, 2 minarets topped the cornices. 2 more enhanced the front. Above all, atop the 5-tiered tower to the rear, a golden dome seemed to touch the clouds. Dulcie tied her scarf around her silver-gray hair in deference to the Indian custom of covering the head to show respect, and, after adding ours to the hundreds of shoes that dotted the steps, we passed into the shade of the porch, wincing at the stone floor's sudden coolness. By way of a huge side door, we tiptoed across the high-ceilinged hall's mat-covered floor to the women's section. All around us, the Indians chanted sweetly and hauntingly what Dulcie called shabads, poems in praise of the Guru. Cross-legged, I made myself comfortable on a cushion facing the platform where, during the master's absence, the person giving the discourse occupied the center. To his side sat the pati, who sang a poem by one of the well-known saints on which the discourse was given. No icons, no altars, no pews, no pictures, no candles, no stained glass windows, not even incense disturbed the spaciousness. Only birds chittered in the beams high over our heads, and bees harmonized their hum with the drone of the singing below. "Netta," my mother had reprimanded countless times, "will you please get off the floor and sit in a chair like a lady?" But throughout my life I had found the cross-legged posture more relaxing than any other. Now, however, faced with a unique opportunity to prove my prowess, I became restless and fidgety because I had never sat thus for so long. To have to listen for an hour and a half like that every morning to a sermon in a language that I don't understand, that's not what I was expecting. What a bore, I grumbled to myself. I finally escaped having to go to church every Sunday. Now, where is the freedom in doing this every day? Released from the satsang ghar, I found myself in step with a woman named Shirley, a newcomer like myself to the Dera, whose short, blonde hair and freckled, outdoors look betrayed her California background before she had a chance to say she came from Menlo Park. Together, we ferreted out the cloth shop, a whitewashed cubicle at one end of the main square. While urchins with crisp, dark eyes and naked from the waist down played tag in the shaded openness of an inner square, their mothers squatted in the entranceway of the shop, haggling over thread and fabric. "For ladies' suit?" the shopkeeper inquired, finally noting our interest in a fabric. Shirley acquiesced. I wasn't looking. I didn't know yet if I was staying. "Oh, no, that material not for ladies' suit, only for man's suit," he asserted, pushing the bolt that Shirley had pulled partway out to examine back into the stack. "Why is that?" Shirley asked. "It's all the same." "Oh, no, this has stripes," he observed, as though it had some rare disease. "Only for man's suit. Inferior material for ladies' suit. You want superior material." With that, he thrust a bolt of plain beige at Shirley. "I want a striped top and a plain bottom," she insisted. "I want inferior material." Shaking his head and muttering, inferior material," and thoroughly dismayed by the foreign woman's bohemian habits, the shopkeeper finally relented and wrapped Shirley's striped fabric. We then visited the seamstresses in their one-room cottage at the far end of the street, that dead-ended at the guest house. I was struck by their cramped quarters, by the lack of cooking and bathroom conveniences, and by the lack of frills save for photographs of the Radha Soami masters, and I couldn't resist comparing their few possessions with Joy's 63 trunks and my own apartment full of belongings awaiting my return. To demonstrate her desire for a deviation from the ordinary baggy tops of the churidar pants, Shirley grabbed her slacks with both hands, stretching them across her midriff like a sausage casing. Nodding toward the beige fabric, then back at her makeshift example, she said, "Tight." "Good for pants," the elder, gray-haired, buxom sister granted, scrutinizing the plain beige. With hands on hips, however, she surveyed the unconventional style that Shirley requested and frowned. "Is not good." While the elder sister measured Shirley, 3 elderly ladies dressed in immaculate white Punjabi outfits with white voile shawls tossed over their gray heads burst barefooted through the back door. Lining up on the edge of a rope bed, they exclaimed over the beige fabric in rasping, high-pitched voices like the chorus in a Greek tragedy. Though the lady nearest the end of the bed then fell fast asleep, the others kept up a running commentary in Punjabi on the tape measure's antics. The happy gathering was enhanced by the arrival of a young, portly, sweet-faced girl who nursed her chubby baby, and it was soon further enlarged by a tall, strikingly handsome gentleman in a blue turban. Then a short, stout man stopped by. Unable to squeeze into the room, he called in his views on women's wear from his vantage point in the doorway. When the pant measurements were complete, Shirley reached back into her parcel for the shirt fabric. "Man's suit, not for you, for man's suit," the elder sister gasped when the striped fabric tumbled out. 8 sets of vocal cords chimed discordantly, leaving Shirley and I about to flee when the younger sister, dark and innocent-looking, rose from her squatting position in front of her sewing machine on the floor and grabbed the offensive material. Holding it up to Shirley with the plain beige underneath, she studied it intently. "Is good for you," she concluded. "Good shirt." Then, suddenly, smiles broke out and heads nodded. Even the sleeping grandmother was rocked awake by their joyous agreement that Shirley could have her inferior shirt. "I wonder if she'll ever see that outfit," I thought as we left the cottage. Nobody wrote down her measurements. Lunch that day was a buffet of salad, soup, rice, vegetable cutlets, dal, curds, chapatis, and a wheat pudding for dessert, which I shared with Charmian and Twink, 2 Cambridge students from London, and Errol from South Africa. After the meal, we gathered in Charmian's room. Directing his puckish face at me, Errol sighed. "All my life I've longed to wear a turban. Can you imagine? Old faithful Call ordering me around as usual." "Who?" I asked uncomprehendingly. "Call," Errol elaborated. "The negative power. Lord of our universe. Satsangis know how well he polices us with justice, but without mercy." Later that night, as I paged through Darya Lal Kapoor's Call of the Great Master, I would read this definition of Kal. Kal literally means time or death, the time spirit, universal mind, the name given to the power that controls all the 3 worlds, which are perishable. Kal rules and regulates the whole world, rather the universe, gross, subtle, and causal, and will not let anyone cross his threshold to enter the realm of Satpurush until that soul has been thoroughly cleansed of all desires, etc. Anyway, Errol was recounting, one day for a lark I had one tied and wore my turban to satsang. Maharajji didn't even notice me. He never said a word. The following day, I didn't wear it and I walked right into him. "I didn't recognize you this evening," Errol mimicked in a much deeper voice. "Who tied the turban for you?" "Who did, Errol?" Charmian prodded. "Maharajji's son. When I confessed that to him, I wanted to melt into the concrete. I was so embarrassed. I wanted to die so badly right there that I almost missed his reply. I might have guessed." "What do you mean, Errol, he didn't notice you?" Twink queried slyly. When Charmian and I arrived unannounced in July, they opened the guest house especially for us. Then Master told us that we'd have to leave in August while they readied everything for the fall arrivals. So we went to Kashmir, where we bought the most fabulous outfits, flashy capes with bright embroidery, great hand-woven shawls, even dhotis. Feeling smashing, we wore our gear to the first satsang back at the Dera. Afterward, Dave pulled us aside and suggested that we not go out in public like that again. Master had commented to him that he had felt like the film producer of Tales of the Arabian Nights. An ego trip, Errol remarked. Just like my turban, your duds were an ego trip. My ESP with Joy, my knowing and telling. That was an ego trip too, I suddenly realized, but I plunged into the conversation with a change of pace. Did you like Kashmir, Twink? I asked. That morning after breakfast, my South African friends had invited me to join them for 2 days in Kashmir. They were planning to leave on the 10th and return on the 12th or 13th, in plenty of time for the master's return on the 15th. I was enchanted by the idea and wanted to go, finances permitting. It's beautiful, Twink replied. But we didn't have much money and the food's pretty awful. Say, it ought to be easy to be a vegetarian in California. I'm not a vegetarian, I admitted. You're not a vegetarian, Charmian repeated flatly. And I thought you were a satsangi. Are you going to ask for initiation? Don't know yet, I confessed, observing the several pictures of the master that stood on her shelves and were stuck into the mirror clips. I just couldn't put my finger on why the photos I had seen of the master had such a familiar feeling about them, but they did. No meat, no fish, no fowl, not even eggs, I observed, ticking off the philosophy's vegetarian disciplines to the trio around me. You don't drink. You don't smoke pot or take drugs, if you ever did. What's going to replace all those thrills? Confidently, angelically, her attitude having sloughed off every ounce of its frivolity, Charmian beamed back at me. We've been initiated by a living master. What can really be so great, so different about that, I wondered that night as I counted my rupees. They're young, so full of love, hope, and enthusiasm. But what about reality?